The silence in the car was a physical weight, heavier than the mist clinging to the narrow Scottish road. It wasn't an angry silence. We'd burned through all our anger months ago, leaving only this hollow, aching quiet behind. It was a silence shaped by years of negative pregnancy tests and doctor's appointments that ended in sympathetic headshakes. This trip through the Highlands was supposed to be a reset button, a way to find our way back to the people we were before our world shrank to the size of a single desperate wish. From the driver's seat, I stole a glance at Ilara. She was watching the landscape slide by, a blur of deep greens and moody grays. I knew she wasn't really seeing it. Her gaze was turned inward, lost in the labyrinth of our shared grief. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, focusing on the winding road as a shield against the unspoken things that filled the space between us. I missed her. I missed the easy way we used to be, the way her laughter could fill a room. Now, we were just two ghosts haunting the shell of a marriage. "We should be there soon," I said, my voice feeling like a clumsy intrusion. "The turnoff is just after a stone bridge, according to the directions." Ilara just nodded, her finger tracing a pattern on the fogged-up window. My words had bounced right off her. The hope I'd harbored for this trip was already sputtering out, leaving me with the familiar, bitter taste of disappointment. We weren't fixing anything here. We were just grieving in a more scenic location. The Crossroads appeared suddenly, materializing out of the mist like a forgotten memory. It wasn't a modern junction, but an old, elemental place where two dirt tracks intersected our road. A gnarled, leafless oak tree stood sentinel at its center, its branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. A shiver of unease traced its way down my spine. "That's odd," I murmured, slowing the car instinctively. "This isn't on the map." That's when Ilara whispered, her voice tight with an unfamiliar urgency. "Liam, stop. Stop the car." I pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel. "What is it?" "Did you see an animal?" She didn't answer. She was already out of the car, moving toward the tree as if in a trance. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I got out and followed, the cold, damp air hitting me, the sound of the engine swallowed by the oppressive silence of the place. And then I saw what she had seen. Tucked into a hollow between the gnarled roots of the oak was a wicker basket, and inside, swaddled in a clean white blanket, was a baby. The world tilted on its axis. All the air rushed from my lungs. It couldn't be real. It was a hallucination, a cruel trick played by a landscape steeped in myth and our own desperate longing. "My God," I breathed, finally finding my voice. Is it alive?" Ilara reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against a cheek that was cool but undeniably real. At her touch, the baby's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of moss, a deep, impossible green that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancient hills. The baby didn't cry. It just looked at her, its gaze steady and unnervingly intelligent. I watched as years of pain washed away from Ilara's face, replaced by a surge of fierce, protective love. The change was so sudden, so total, it terrified me. All reason had fled her, the questions hammering in my own mind. Who would leave a baby here? Why? Were meaningless whispers to her. "We can't just leave it here," she said, her voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Liam, we can't." I was torn. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. The place felt ancient and dangerous. The baby's strange, knowing eyes set every nerve on edge. But then I looked at Ilara, at the raw hope that had finally broken through the surface of her grief, and my resolve crumbled. The desire for a child had been mine, too. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a future I had all but given up on. "Okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "Okay, let's get it into the car. We'll take it to the cottage and call the police from there." As Ilara lifted the baby from the basket, the mist seemed to thicken, wrapping us in a soft, gray blanket. She held the child close, her face transformed. And as we drove away, leaving the ancient Crossroads to fade behind us like a half-forgotten dream, I had the chilling premonition that we hadn't found something, but that something had found us. The rental cottage was tucked away at the end of a long, muddy track, a stone and slate haven against the encroaching wilderness. My hands shook as I struck a match, the flare of light pushing back the gloomy shadows of the late afternoon. As the kindling caught, casting a warm, dancing glow across the room, I watched Ilara settle onto the sofa, the baby cradled in her arms as if she'd held him her entire life. The journey from the Crossroads had been surreal. The child hadn't made a peep, simply watching the world go by with its unsettlingly serene moss-green eyes. Now, in the firelight, its strangeness was even more pronounced. Its skin seemed to have a faint luminescence, and the wisps of silver hair shimmered. Ilara didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she didn't care. She was captivated, humming a wordless lullaby I'd never heard, her entire being focused on the tiny creature in her lap. "I'm going to try and get a signal," I announced, my voice sounding rough in the quiet room. I pulled my phone from my pocket and walked towards the window, holding it up. Nothing. Not a single bar. I tried her phone, then the cottage's landline, which was predictably dead. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The storm must have knocked out the lines, and the car wouldn't start when I tried it back there. I saw a flicker of unease in Ilara's eyes, but it was quickly smothered as she looked back down at the baby. "It's fine," she said soothingly, more to herself than to me. "We're safe here. We'll sort it out in the morning." But as the hours bled into one another, fine began to feel like the wrong word. The baby never cried. Not once. When Ilara, running on instinct, tried to feed it some warmed milk from the fridge using a sterilized teaspoon, the child politely refused, turning its head with a gentle finality. It didn't seem hungry. It didn't seem tired. It simply existed, calm and watchful, its gaze following our movements. Ilara named him Rowan. The name came to her unbidden, she said, as if whispered on the wind. It felt right, she insisted, solid and earthy like the ancient tree where we had found him. I remained silent on the matter, my anxiety a palpable presence in the room. I busied myself with practicalities, checking the locks, taking inventory of the pantry, trying the landline again and again. It was a way to avoid looking too closely at the child who was currently the calm center of our chaotic world. Late in the evening, something shifted. Ilara had placed a vase of slightly wilted heather on the mantelpiece earlier, a sad-looking welcome. As she sat rocking Rowan by the fire, I noticed a faint, sweet scent filling the air. My eyes drifted to the mantelpiece. The heather was no longer wilted. It stood upright, its purple flowers vibrant and full, as if freshly picked. I stopped my pacing and stared, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the flowers, then at the baby, a muscle tightening in my jaw. I didn't say anything, but I saw from Ilara's wide-eyed stare that she was thinking the same thing. This wasn't normal. The night grew deeper, the wind howling outside the thick stone walls. Ilara, despite her exhaustion, felt no desire to sleep. She seemed preternaturally awake, energized. Her bond with Rowan was intensifying with every passing moment. I watched her, and it was like seeing a stranger. This was a fierce, primal connection that seemed to sing in her blood. She looked as if she had been waiting for him her entire life, that every moment of pain and loss had been a path leading her to this single, perfect moment. I, however, was cracking. I couldn't reconcile the impossible reality in our living room. A baby found at a misty crossroads. A baby that didn't eat or cry. A baby whose presence seemed to make dead flowers bloom. I felt like a character in a dark fairy tale, a story my Irish grandmother might have told me as a warning. "Ilara," I began, my voice low and strained. "We need to talk about this. This isn't right." "He's perfect," Ilara whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked down at Rowan, whose green eyes met hers. "He's our perfect boy." "He's not ours." My voice cracked, a touch of hysteria creeping in. "We found him, in the middle of nowhere. Don't you see how strange this is? He's not a normal baby." A cold fury, sharp and protective, rose in her. "Don't say that," she hissed. "He's just quiet. He's a good baby. What's wrong with you? This is what we've always wanted." "Is it?" I shot back, gesturing wildly around the isolated cottage. "To be trapped here with a child who doesn't even act human? We don't know anything about him, where he came from." The baby, Rowan, remained impassive through our heated exchange. He simply watched, his gaze shifting from Ilara to me and back again, his expression one of ancient, placid understanding. The fire in the hearth suddenly flared, spitting a shower of angry orange sparks, and the wind outside shrieked like a banshee. The cottage, once a cozy sanctuary, now felt like a cage, and the quiet child in Ilara's arms was the lock on the door. By morning, the cottage was thick with the tension of our unspoken war. I woke from a fitful sleep on the armchair to find Ilara exactly where I'd left her, curled on the sofa with Rowan sleeping peacefully on her chest. The resurrected heather on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me with its impossible vibrancy. I couldn't stay. The car was dead, the phones were useless, and a primal fear was clawing its way up my throat. I had to get help. I had to find someone who could make sense of this madness. "I'm walking to the village," I announced, my voice rough with sleep. "I saw a sign for it on the main road. Said it was about 5 miles. They'll have a phone. I can call for a mechanic and the police." Ilara looked up, her expression guarded. The fierce, protective light in her eyes hadn't dimmed. "We don't need the police, Liam. We need to think about what we're going to do. What we're going to do is report a found child, Ilara. That's the law. That's what normal people do." The word normal hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. "Just go," she said, turning her attention back to Rowan. "Be careful." It was a dismissal, not a blessing. The moment I stepped outside, the strangeness of the land settled over me like a shroud. The mist had thinned, but the air was unnaturally still and cold. The path that had seemed merely muddy the day before now felt menacing, the trees on either side crowding in, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. I felt watched. It was a paranoid, prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made me walk faster, my boots slipping and sliding in the thick mud. I started hearing things. A whisper that sounded like my name, snatched away by the wind. A giggle, thin and reedy, from a thicket of gorse. I'd whirl around, heart pounding, only to see nothing but the shifting gray landscape. The 5 miles to the village of Invercraig felt like 50. The world I had stepped into was not the world I had known yesterday. Invercraig was little more than a cluster of stone houses and a pub called the Crooked Kestrel. Smoke curled from its chimney, a welcome plume of civilization. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stumbled inside, the dim, peat-scented warmth a welcome relief. The pub was empty, save for a grizzled bartender and a very old man nursing a pint by a smouldering fire. The old man had watery blue eyes and watched me approach the bar with a disquieting stillness. "Phone's out, lad," the bartender said before I could even speak. Storm took the line down. My shoulders slumped. My car's broken down about 5 miles out, at the cottage by Locaine Dube. The old man by the fire shifted. The old MacLeod place? Folk don't usually stay out there. The glen gets restless. Desperate, I found myself walking towards him. "We found something," I blurted out. "Yesterday, at the crossroads with the old oak tree." The old man's eyes widened. He set his pint down with a deliberate thud. "The Wishing Cross," he said, his voice a low, gravelly burr. "You should have kept driving." "What was it you found?" "A baby," I whispered. The bartender made a nervous gesture, but the old man leaned forward, his gaze boring into me. "Tell me about the bairn," he commanded. "Does it cry?" "No," I admitted. "Never." "Does it eat?" "No." "And its eyes," the old man continued, his voice dropping lower still. "Tell me of its eyes." "Green," I said, "like moss. And it feels like he knows things." The old man sank back into his chair, a long, weary sigh escaping him. "It is not a he, lad. And it is not a bairn. Not one of ours, anyway." He took a deep swig of his ale. "You've taken a changeling. A child of the Seath." The word Seath, the Fae, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The stories my grandmother used to tell me, the ones I'd dismissed as charming folklore, came rushing back with terrifying clarity. "They're not evil, not always," the old man said, seeing the terror in my eyes. "But they are not like us. They are the magic of the land itself. The child will bring you joy, a love so fierce it will burn the very soul of you. But there is always a price. It will bind you to this place. You get your heart's desire, but you lose the world to keep it." Every word explained the horror of the last 24 hours, the quiet, the blooming flowers, Ilara's obsessive, all-consuming love. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. "What do?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. The old man shook his head slowly. "The bond is already made, especially with your wife. You must return the gift, take it back to the Wishing Cross. But convincing her, that may be harder than fighting the hills themselves." A cold, dreadful certainty washed over me. I had to get back. Flinging a thank you to the man, I fled the pub, back into the unsettling stillness of the glen, his final warning echoing in my ears. "Hurry, lad. The longer it stays, the deeper the roots grow." The 5-mile journey back was a frantic, heart-pounding nightmare. Every shadow seemed to leap and writhe at the edge of my vision, and the whispers on the wind were clearer now, weaving through the trees with a musical, alien cadence. The land was awake, and it knew I was trying to break its spell. By the time the slate roof of the cottage came into view, I was gasping for breath, my clothes soaked with sweat despite the biting cold. I burst through the door and stopped dead. The scene before me stole the air from my lungs. The cottage had been transformed into an enchanted bower. Thick, leafy vines, studded with luminous white blossoms, had crept in through the window frames and woven themselves into a lattice across the glass. The air was thick with the intoxicating scent of night-blooming flowers and damp earth. The fire in the hearth burned with a mesmerizing emerald-green flame, casting an ethereal glow over everything. And in the center of it all was Ilara. She sat in the armchair, bathed in the strange green light, a wreath of the white flowers tangled in her hair. She looked radiant, beautiful in a way I hadn't seen in years. The lines of grief had been erased, replaced by a look of absolute beatific contentment. Rowan lay in her lap, his silver hair shimmering, his moss-green eyes wide open and fixed on her face. "You're back," she said, her voice soft and melodic, like the chiming of distant bells. "We were waiting for you. Isn't it beautiful? Rowan has made the house beautiful for us." My blood ran cold. "Elara, this isn't real," I said, my voice shaking as I took a step into the room. "This isn't him. He's doing this to us. To you." "Don't be silly, Liam," she replied, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a shadow of the woman I knew behind the enchanted facade. "He's just a baby. He's our baby." "No." My voice was sharper than I intended. "He's not." I spoke to a man in the village. He knew Elara. He called it a changeling, a child of the Fae. I recounted the old man's story, the words tumbling out of me in a desperate torrent, the warnings about the seath, the gilded cage, the price of keeping the child. I explained that the beautiful transformation of the cottage wasn't a gift. It was the bars of our prison taking shape around us. Elara listened, her expression hardening, but not with anger, with a kind of stubborn, heartbreaking desperation. "So what if it is?" she whispered, her voice losing its musical quality and becoming raw. "What if it's all true? The old me was miserable, Liam. She was a ghost. Do you have any idea what it feels like to finally be whole? To not have that gaping emptiness inside me every single second of the day?" I stared at her, my argument crumbling. This wasn't a simple spell I could break with logic. She wasn't just a victim. She was a willing participant. She was choosing this beautiful lie because our painful reality had become unbearable. "This isn't wholeness, Elara. It's an illusion," I pleaded. "It feels real enough to me," she shot back, clutching Rowan tighter. "He's taken the pain away. For years, all you've seen when you look at me is a failure, a broken thing. He looks at me and I'm everything. Why would you want to take that away from me? From us?" Through it all, Rowan remained silent. He shifted his gaze from Elara's face to mine. There was no emotion in his eyes, only a deep, bottomless knowing. He understood every word. I had the sickening realization that this was the true nature of the price. It didn't just sever our bond, it fed on our deepest griefs, offering a perfect, impossible cure. "He's taking you from me," I whispered, the accusation laced with a desperate sorrow. "No," Elara said, her eyes flashing with a cold fire that didn't belong to her, yet was fueled by her own very human pain. "You're trying to drag me back into the dark, and I won't go." I looked from my wife's transfigured face to the unnervingly calm child in her arms. The old man's words echoed in my head. "The longer it stays, the deeper the roots grow." The roots hadn't just taken hold in Elara, she had woven them there herself. She wasn't in a cage, she had helped build it. And getting her to leave would mean convincing her that the familiar pain of our old life was better than the hollow perfection of this new one. The stalemate held for what felt like an eternity. I stood on one side of the enchanted room, a desperate ambassador from a world of logic and loss, while Elara sat enthroned on the other, the willing queen of a floral prison, guarding her magical child. The air crackled with our opposing wills. A silent, bitter war waged in the heart of the glen. As twilight began to fall, painting the sky outside the vine-covered windows in shades of violet and rose, they appeared. Figures at the edge of the clearing, tall and slender, half hidden by the mist. They moved with an unearthly grace, their faces pale and beautiful, their eyes shining with a faint, internal light. The Seath. They had come for their own. They weren't threatening. They were merely waiting, a silent, expectant audience. Their presence finally broke through Alara's enchantment. She saw them, and a flicker of genuine human fear crossed her face. "Who are they?" she whispered, pulling Rowan even closer. "They're his family," I said gently, seizing the opportunity, the crack in her armor. "They're the people of the hills. They're not here to hurt us, Alara. They're just waiting for him." The child in her arms stirred, lifting a tiny hand toward the figures. A soft green light pulsed from his palm, and the beings in the woods responded in kind. It was a greeting, a call home. The truth was now undeniable. He did not belong to us. "They want to take him," she choked out, tears finally streaming down her face, washing away the serene mask. "I can't let him go. I love him." "I know you do," I said, my own voice thick with emotion as I finally crossed the room to kneel before her. I took her hand. It was cold as ice. "But Alara, this love, it's consuming you. It's consuming us. Look at me." She tore her eyes away from the child and met my gaze, but the vacant, beatific look was still there. She was slipping away again. Desperate, I searched for anything that could pull her back. "Do you remember the day we got the keys to the first apartment?" I asked, my voice cracking. "The one with the crooked door and the lemon-yellow kitchen? You stood in the middle of the empty living room and said, 'It's not much, but it's our not much.' Do you remember that, Alara?" For a second, there was nothing. Then her eyes blinked, and a flicker of recognition, of genuine memory, broke through the magical haze. The spell wasn't just offering peace, it was erasing our past. Her past. Her. "Our not much," she repeated, her voice a fractured whisper. The enchantment fought to hold on, but I could see the war raging within her now, the pull of the perfect, painless love in her arms against the messy, imperfect but real love of the life we had built and lost together. "He's beautiful, but he's not ours," I pressed gently. "He's theirs. We can stay here and become a story, a whisper in the glen. Or we can go back. It will hurt. God, it will be empty again. But it will be our empty. Together." Her whole body shook with a terrible, silent sob. It was the choice between a beautiful dream and a painful reality. Slowly, her gaze shifted from my face to the waiting figures, and finally, down to the child. She looked into his ancient, moss-green eyes one last time and saw no judgment there, only a deep and unwavering understanding. With a final, heart-shattering gasp, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Goodbye," she whispered. She held him out to me. The transfer was a physical agony, a tearing of spirit from flesh. The moment he was in my arms, I felt a palpable change in the air outside, a release, as if the glen itself had taken a breath and was letting us go. The cottage instantly began to change. The green fire sputtered to a normal orange. The vines withered to dust. Together we walked out. The seath parted before us as I carried the changeling back to the crossroads. I gently placed the basket between the roots of the old oak. Alara knelt and tucked the white blanket around him, her tears falling onto his porcelain cheek. We walked back to the car without looking back. I turned the key in the ignition, and this time, the engine roared to life. The silence that filled the car on the journey away was different. It wasn't the hollow, aching quiet of our arrival, nor the enchanted peace of the cottage. It was heavy, weighted with a shared, impossible memory. I looked over at Alara, who was staring out the window, her face pale and tear-streaked. The wound of our childlessness had been ripped open again, wider than ever. But as I reached across the console and took her hand, her fingers intertwined with mine, clinging with a strength that hadn't been there for years. We were leaving the glen broken, but we were no longer broken apart. We were leaving it together.